Original Voices of Wartime Ukraine. Presented by Ukrainian Crisis Media Center.
Path of the Volunteer. The phenomenon of people saving lives in Kherson.
This war, the bloodiest since World War II, has resulted in a powerful social group of public leaders, Ukrainian volunteers. These are people whose opinions are heard, individuals who are honored. Today, Ukrainian volunteering is neither an occupation nor a type of activity. It is a consciously chosen path of valor and sincerity. It is a way of understanding that Ukrainian indomitability, which has become a global legend in the last 2 years, is founded on support, assistance, and collaborative efforts. Ukrainian volunteers are a phenomenon that will undoubtedly be studied in sociology schools around the world in the near future. Ksenia Keleberda, a journalist from Kherson, tells about them in this story. Who are the Kherson volunteers?
After the Ukrainian Defense Forces liberated Kherson from the invaders, the city found itself in a sort of vacuum, or more appropriately, on the verge of serious social challenges. The city, once housed approximately 300,000 people, was devastated and partially destroyed. And those who survived the occupation needed to get their lives back on track as quickly as possible. What exactly did volunteer mean at that time? Everything you can imagine, from basic medical care to giving away simple food and clothing, all this against a backdrop of constant shelling. After leaving Kherson, the occupiers began destroying it by any means possible. Kherson relies on volunteers today just as much as it did 2 years ago. There are many of them throughout the city. How many exactly? Few know the real number. After all, as previously mentioned, volunteering in today's world is not a goal, a means, or a type of activity. It's a path that everyone can join. Every day, engaged people in Kherson walk down this path. They now have the wounded city in their hands. Volunteers bring food, medicine, warm blankets, generators, and other supplies to areas bombarded by the enemy on a daily basis, making restoration and repair impossible. However, those areas are home to the elderly, people with limited mobility, and those who have neither a chance nor a place to go, or couldn't even think of leaving their homes. Today, volunteers assist these people in Kherson by transporting them to hospital, caring for them, cooking for them, and delivering food. They also help search for missing family members of residents.
The first days of the war.
In the first days of the war, it became clear who was who. According to locals, the majority of deputies, some activists, and heads of state institutions fled Kherson as soon as they heard the first shells exploding. Gennady Lahuta, the head of the regional state administration, and Alexander Samolenko, the head of the regional council, have both fled. Mayor Igor Kolykhaev appeared to have fallen into prostration and remained silent. People in Kherson had no idea what to do because there was no appeal, explanation, or recommendations. Fighting had already broken out on the outskirts of the city near the Antonivsky Bridge. Dismay and desperation on the first day of the war.
The second day of the full-scale invasion.
The bread was gone. The bakery stopped operating. Shops and pharmacies closed after selling out their last inventory. People grabbed what they could and took home whatever was edible. Over the city, the roar of battle grew louder and louder. However, the second day was completely different. Kherson residents had already formed social media groups and launched new Telegram channels. People began to unite. They collected blankets, food, and medicine for the Antonivsky Bridge defenders. They took everything to the volunteer headquarters. Since public transport was inoperable, those with cars picked up and drove people carrying packages through the gloomy winter city. The city's volunteer headquarters worked tirelessly for several days, from February 26 to March 1st, until Russian troops arrived in force. Round the clock, without breaks. There were hundreds of people present. A tight-knit, organized, and focused human anthill, everyone knew their place. The townspeople gathered medicines, food, warm clothes, and mats and took them all to the Antonievsky Bridge, where fighting was taking place. The wounded were taken to hospitals. Doctors then hid the injured in their homes. Some managed to escape on boats. On the streets, people welded anti-tank hedgehogs out of the sheet iron and created Molotov cocktails. Anyone who has seen a post-apocalyptic film knows that they all start with the same scene. People go crazy and gnaw at each other for food and medicine. But in Kherson, the post-apocalypse played out differently. People did not go wild. Quite the opposite. The townspeople did not vandalize shops or cut each other's throats for food. In the long lines waiting for food and medicine, everyone was extremely polite. Women with children and the elderly were allowed to pass through without a queue. Some even made jokes. Even though everyone was terrified, no one showed it. Of course, there were also looters in Kherson. They dragged the remaining household appliances from the bombed-out Fabrika shopping center. TVs, hoovers, and microwaves. The immediately formed voluntary municipal guard put a stop to this abuse. The looting ceased within 2 days. On March 1st, Russian soldiers entered Kherson. That's when the real looting started. Cynical, unprecedented in scope, and characterized by savage greed. The Russians totally plunder everything in their path. Looted shops were closed, warehouses in the city were emptied, and supplies were depleted. Pharmacies did not operate at all. The invaders' preoccupation with looting enabled the Kherson volunteers to continue their work undetected by the enemy. Volunteer centers got down to business. They identified their areas of responsibility and discussed their work with others. Everything the occupiers hoped for in terms of panic and fear failed. Any disagreements, jealousy, or accusations between their residents simply vanished. Instead, a monolithic community emerged, driven by hatred for the enemy and a desire to free their hometown from the invaders.
Despite tears and risks.
Of course, it is impossible to list all of Kherson's volunteers. They all contributed and, without exaggeration, saved someone's life. Here are some names and surnames. Irina Salyukhova's Patriot Cats, they delivered medicine to the city. Perhaps the most challenging volunteer work in the early months of the war was delivering medicines to the people, particularly those that the sick could not survive without. And Patriot Cats did the best they could, with tears, losses, and risks. Irina had a long career in journalism, and her professional skills came in handy when people responded to her posts, donated, and helped. Irina's connections with the government and businesses allowed her to open pharmacy warehouses that still had medicine. Volodymyr Kosyuk and Irina Mezantseva, journalists, helped low-income people both during and after the occupation. Most of them lived in the villages near Kherson. Those people were denied everything they needed, including food and, in some cases, clothing. Every trip to the occupied villages could cost them their lives. Olena Pimenova approached the matter from a different and inventive perspective. She created a collection of clothing featuring Kherson symbols, as well as delicious jams, puzzles, and shoppers. She donated the profits from the sale of these items to Kherson charitable organizations. Natalia Shatilova-Pogasyi, the head of the Red Cross Dnipro branch, worked during the occupation and is still active today. Her organization incurred significant losses. Her fellow volunteer Victoria Yarishko was killed during the shelling of Kherson. Enemy shells hit the organization's office several times. After the city was liberated, Katerina Tsembaluk and her husband collected requests from people about elderly family members with whom they had lost contact. She then went looking for them and offered assistance. Many other volunteers made it work with the most basic necessities. They baked bread, cooked hot meals, assisted families with children and people with disabilities, obtained medicines, and removed people from the occupation. After Kherson was liberated, the volunteer movement expanded even further. more and more people join new projects. In addition to large volunteer organizations with international connections that deliver large amount of humanitarian aid, many Kherson residents continue to believe in the volunteer wave. People share food, feed animals, work near homes, keep order, and assist the military.
For the sake of the people, one of hundreds, volunteer, Olha Chernyshova.
Today, most of Kherson leaves until 3 p.m. Most shops and pharmacies are open and public transportation operates. Life continues until 5 p.m. in Tavrisky, a residential area where shells are rarely launched. Cafes, bank branches, and second-hand shops are all open. Silpo, which was renamed Stoyimo, We Will Survive, after 3 hits, and ATB supermarkets stay open until 7 p.m. People can even walk here, not by sprinting along the wall to get to the shops, but just walking from shop to shop. Shops serve as gathering places for Kherson residents to meet, date, and hang out. Teenagers congregate in noisy groups near shops, and nobody blames them. These fashionably dressed youngsters of war would naturally fit into the life of any city. However, they live in Kherson, under continual anxiety from the fear of death, the inability to study, communicate, or have fun. "I'm going to the store as if it's a vacation," jokes a cheerful, tastefully dressed pensioner wearing makeup. The vast majority of people here are pensioners. They aren't in a hurry. They carefully select products and discuss the latest news. Olha Chernyshova's shop has long been transformed into a club and a volunteer hub. It is the only shop in Kherson's most dangerous district, Riverport. Townspeople come to the store to buy groceries, drink coffee, and talk. Furthermore, humanitarian aid is brought to and transported from here. The store owner is constantly on her cell phone, giving instructions and taking orders. On March 1st, 2022, my customers called and informed me that Russian soldiers were on their way. We removed the sign, turned off the power, and did not return to work the following day. However, the shop was only closed for 1 day during the occupation. At the time, there were Russian tanks near the shop. 5 nearby shops were looted by Russians. Cigarettes, alcohol, and money were all taken from there. But they did not notice ours. The next day, we returned to find the asphalt riddled with tank tracks and black piles of rags everywhere. It turned out that the occupiers looted the ATB supermarket, stole socks, and changed their clothes. "What a horrible odor came from those piles of socks," told Olha. The volunteer recalls how the occupiers began passportization of Kherson residents. It was a funny story. When the Russians began issuing passports with a 2-headed chicken, a joke towards the 2-headed eagle on the Russian passports, almost no one came to the Ausweises. Even after adding 10,000 rubles to the passport, there were no queues. The Russians then gathered the homeless from throughout the city. They were given passports, enrolled in the communal service, and paid their first salary. Olha laughs as she recalls how they worked for 3 days before running away. "So we worked, not for the occupants, of course, for the sake of the town and the people, because who will help them? We found food, helped others, and survived the occupation, shelling, flood, and attacks. Several things happened during the occupation, both amusing and terrifying. We made it through it. We thought it was over. We were already breathing normally, but..." Olha continues her story. "We were flooded when they blew up the Kakhovka Dam. The store was flooded by 1 meter and 20 centimeters of water. Plus, during this time, our building suffered 4 hits, including 2 to the roof. But we're still working. We cannot close our store. This is the only shop in our district, and all residents come here." Olha discusses her volunteer activities with not a pinch of self-importance. "I just help, and that's all." She mainly assists people with limited mobility in her extremely dangerous neighborhood who rarely leave their apartments. She brings food and water to them. When asked why she isn't leaving, Olha Chernyshova replied, "If we close our shop, What would happen to our people? We own a generator. We will assist when there is no light. We'll bring them products. Someone must live here. Our soldiers defend us from the trenches. They'll return and there won't be anyone here? Soldiers cannot protect an empty city. Sometimes they come to our store, which is full of soot, and I apologize to the boys. And they smile and say it's okay. They have it even worse. Olha notes that she learns a lot from this type of work. When those who fled return to the city, they will have to reconcile with those who survived the occupation, flooding, and shelling of Kherson. There will be conflicts. I want to gain experience and create a space for communication. We will learn to communicate in a shared language, Olha says. Olha Chernyshova has a large heart and enough love to share around, including with stray cats and dogs. The woman bravely drives her car, works from morning to night, and believes that her hometown will once again be busy and safe. And then she'll breathe again. She will rest and begin to rebuild her small shop, which will include a space for communication, as well as her beloved Kherson.
Supported by the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine, the views of the authors don't necessarily reflect the official position of the U.S. government.